Roosevelt had done almost everything in his power to anger the Japanese, showing a posture of aggression. And on December 4th, 3 days before the attack, Australian intelligence told Roosevelt about a Japanese task force moving towards Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt ignored it. So, as hoped and allowed, on December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, killing 2,400 soldiers. Before Pearl Harbor, 83% of the American public wanted nothing to do with the war. After Pearl Harbor, 1 million men volunteered for the war. It is important to note, Nazi Germany's war effort was largely supported by two organizations, one of which was called IG Farben. IG Farben produced 84% of Germany's explosives, and even the Zyklon B used in the concentration camps to kill millions. One of the unspoken partners of IG Farben was J.D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company in America. In fact, the German Air Force could not operate without a special additive patented by Rockefeller's Standard Oil. The drastic bombing of London by Nazi Germany, for example, was made possible by a $20 million sale of fuel to IG Farben by the Rockefeller Standard Oil Company. This is just one small point on the topic of how American business funded both sides of World War II. One other treasonous organization worth mentioning is the Union Banking Corporation of New York City. Not only did it finance numerous aspects of Hitler's rise to power, along with actual materials during the war, it was also a Nazi money laundering bank, which was eventually exposed for having millions of dollars of Nazi money in its vaults. The Union Banking Corporation of New York was eventually seized for violations of the Trading with the Enemy Act. Guess who the director and vice president of the Union Bank was? Prescot Bush, our current president's grandfather, and of course our former president's father. Keep that in mind when considering the moral and political dispositions of the Bush family.
Some seem to believe that we should negotiate with the terrorists and radicals as if some ingenious argument will persuade them they have been wrong all along. We've heard this foolish delusion before. As Nazi tanks crossed into Poland in 1939, an American senator declared, "Lord, if I could only have talked to Hitler, all this might have been avoided." We have an obligation to call this what it is, the false comfort of appeasement.
Vietnam. The United States' official declaration of war on North Vietnam in 1964 came after an alleged incident involving two U.S. destroyers being attacked by North Vietnamese PT boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. This was known as the Gulf of Tonkin incident. This single situation was the catalytic pretext for massive troop deployment and full-fledged warfare. One problem, however, the attack on the U.S. destroyers by Vietnamese PT boats never happened. It was a completely staged event to have an excuse to enter the war. Former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara stated years later that the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a mistake, while many other insiders and officers have come forward, relaying that it was a contrived farce, a complete lie. Once in the war, it was business as usual. In October 1966, President Lyndon Johnson lifted trading restrictions on the Soviet bloc, knowing full well that the Soviets were providing upwards of 80% of North Vietnam's war supplies. Consequently, Rockefeller interests financed factories in the Soviet Union, which the Soviets used to manufacture military equipment and send it to North Vietnam. However, the funding of both sides of this conflict was only one side of the coin. In 1985, Vietnam's rules of engagement were declassified. This detailed what American troops were and were not allowed to do in the war. It included absurdities like North Vietnamese anti-aircraft missile systems could not be bombed until they were known to be fully operational. No enemy could be pursued once they crossed the border of Laos or Cambodia. And most revealing of all, the most critical strategic targets were not allowed to be attacked unless initiated by high military officials. Apart from these imposed ludicrous limitations, North Vietnam was informed of these restrictions and therefore could base entire strategies around the limitations of the American forces. This is why the war went on so long. And the bottom line is this: the Vietnam War was never meant to be won, just sustained. This war for profit resulted in 58,000 American deaths and 3 million dead Vietnamese. So, where are we now? September 11th was the jumpstart for what is now an accelerated agenda by the ruthless elite. It was a staged war pretext no different than the sinking of the Lusitania, the provoking of Pearl Harbor, and the Gulf of Tonkin lie. In fact, if 9/11 wasn't a planned war pretext, it would be an exception to the rule. It has been used to launch 2 unprovoked illegal wars, one against Iraq and one against Afghanistan. However, 9/11 was a pretext for another war as well, the war against you. The Patriot Act, Homeland Security, the Military Tribunals Act, and other legislations are all completely and entirely designed to destroy your civil liberties and limit your ability to fight back against what is coming. Currently in the United States, unannounced to most brainwashed Americans, your home can be searched without a warrant, without you being home. You can in turn be arrested with no charges revealed to you, detained indefinitely with no access to a lawyer, and legally tortured, all under the suspicion that you might be a terrorist.
Right, waterboarding. We show you the controversial war on terror interrogation technique that the US insists isn't torture. What does the journalist Christopher Hitchens think after experiencing it? The critical question here is this torture? Hello. The United States government has claimed time and again that the practice of waterboarding, which has been used on people it's picked up in the so-called war on terror, is not torture. If it were, it would be both unconstitutional and a breach of international law. We'll hear from him in a moment, but first here's what he went through. It is, unsurprisingly, disturbing footage.
That word is grab. R-E-D. Say the word.
Well, the big lie about it is, you read all the time in the press that it simulates the feeling of drowning. It doesn't simulate it at all. You are in fact being drowned. And I was quite convinced that I had shouted the code red word to make them stop, but I hadn't at all done that. All I knew how to do was to activate the dead man's handle to drop the metal bars that told them that was enough. The critical question: what it would be like if one wasn't able to do that, I really, really don't like to think. The critical question here is your judgment. Is this torture? What I say in my Vanity Fair piece is I plagiarized from Abraham Lincoln about slavery, who said, if that's not wrong, then nothing is wrong. I say about this, if this doesn't count as torture, then nothing does. Up until now, the United States has always insisted that if any other power or gang or group does it to an American, that they'll seek the death penalty for that person. The argument is, of course, needs must. Yes, but with needs must, then what wouldn't you justify?
Take this, the bastard you told me about? Are you beating him?
Maybe he can tell us who the fuck set us up.
If you fucking beat this prick long enough, he'll tell you started the goddamn Chicago fire. Now that don't necessarily make it fucking so! Come on, man, think! Alright, first things fucking last.
And the answer, well, I think it's twofold. One is, we've never actually had a case of a ticking bomb where you know you've got the right person and you know he knows everything you want him to know. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the most celebrated victim of this process, in American hands at any rate, is said to have given up a lot of junk information in response to being waterboarded, because people will, I can now see why, say anything. In a word, what should happen with the practice? It should be discontinued. Christopher Hitchens, thank you very much.
If you need a painted picture of what is happening in this country, let's recognize how history repeats itself. In February 1933, Hitler staged a false flag attack burning down his own German parliament building, the Reichstag, and blamed it on communist terrorists. In the next few weeks, he passed the Enabling Act, which completely eradicated the German Constitution, destroying people's liberties. He then led a series of preemptive wars, all justified to the German people as necessary to maintaining homeland security.
Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them.